So welcome everybody. This is Paul Smyers. I'm a realtor in Southwest Virginia near the Shenandoah Valley. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about zoning and things like that have a lot to do with property. A lot of people, when they buy a home, maybe that they only buy one in their entire life, or maybe two or three. And if they buy in a suburb, there's the realtors take care of it. You just go and you go live in a suburb, and you don't really think much about what's called a zoning. Well, zoning is there are codes that are done by cities and counties that have to do with what you can and cannot do on a piece of land or property. For example, came across one place that was they didn't want to have any pigs and chickens there. So, and they didn't want to. There's certain parts of the community that well, you can live here, but please leave your chickens somewhere else. So there's some really silly things like that happen, and they have good reasons actually in some cases. But there's some other really silly ones that you might get into. For example, that they might say, well, you can only have you have to have all the houses have to be sort of a pastel color, or your grass should be mowed if it's longer than a few inches. You know, you might get a little ticket from the county or the state or city or whatever. So there's some really interesting, strange types of zoning and covenants and things that you can get into. Now, I specialize in real estate out in the countryside, and you encounter a lot of different kinds of zoning out here. It's very, very different from a town, suburb, and so on. For example, the state that I live in, Virginia, has an awful lot. There's a long history of agriculture and railroads and farming and lumbering and so on. So, because of that, there's a huge area of the country, of this part of the country, this in Virginia, that is agricultural, and that's really, really a great thing for people who want to do what they call prepping, or they want to have a little bit of homestead, and they want those chickens and pigs or whatever, and they want 5 dogs, and they want to raise dogs or something, or rabbits. So for those kind of people, and there's a lot of them in this country. That's how this country was founded. We all had our chickens and pigs, and that's how we fed ourselves. So it's a really good thing if you get back to land. I'm personally a great fan of homesteading and getting back to land and having. We don't want to live like in the woods like the pioneers did, but we still want some sense of natural surroundings and domestic animals and wild animals that we feel integrated, and I'm a big fan of that. So that's why I chose Virginia. Now, zoning can be very, very detailed and specific, or it can be very general. I mean, there are places that will say, well, you can't have, for example, there's no airports allowed in this zoning or something like that. Or they might have a zoning where they are allowed airports, or you can have a dock, or you can have multi-story houses or things like that. So what they try to do, the zoning people over the years in various communities, sometimes the zoning laws are really, really strange and they're really out of whack with modern times and so on. But that's what you got to deal with in real estate when you go and figure out what you can and cannot do with a piece of property. Now, there are some instances, for example, just north of New York, up in Westchester County now, a long time ago, it was all farms. It was just all the rich people. You had all these estates, and they had the foxes and hunts and all that stuff. The genteel folks in upstate New York, they had all these big estates, and little by little, the suburbs came eating away at their land. And they'd sell this farm, they'll sell this little. Next thing you know, the horse ranch gets gone, and so on. So, what happened was zoning laws in those kind of areas where some of the counties said, look, if we grant horses or something, or cows are grandfathered in if you keep them. If you stop having those cows and horses on your land, then that's it. That's the end of it. No more. Nobody else can have them. So what people will do, they'll have a really, really nice little estate that has maybe it's been carved down to maybe 5 or 6 acres, and they'll have a couple of llamas there or a couple of goats in there, and just to keep that homesteading grandfathered in. So when you buy a house and you go looking for some place to live, if you want to get into finding out what you can do, because some areas they don't want recreation. For example, if you buy a lot, I just sold a lot that was in a recreational area where they could have a tent there, they can put an RV there, and nobody's going to bother them, you see. But if you buy an empty lot in the middle of a little development and you put your tent there, then people are going to start knocking on your door. So there's reasons to have zoning, but at the same time, there are many options in a state like Virginia where there's a whole lot of recreational and forestry type of land, and places they actually encourage people to farm. Now, in many states, like in Virginia, there are state programs that help and encourage people who want to keep land under production. And you know how the government is, they're not really super generous about it, but there's different ways and maybe different loans or things that are programs that help people keep farms active, because we all benefit by having farming going on and agriculture, because then the fresh food comes nearby and so on. So if you're thinking about moving out of the city and or a regular suburb of a major city, then start thinking about the zoning where you're going to live. And if you are one of those people who does like to have your chickens and pigs and so on, then be sure to pick property in a zoning where that's allowed, especially for something like recreation, because there are areas where you really can buy a piece of property and you can bring your RV there and park it there and nobody's going to bother you, you see. And there are plenty of ways now. People in the past lived without a formal septic tank. They made a septic system, and there's ways to do it cleanly and efficiently and safely now that you can learn about. So again, back to the zoning, it's important, and you can get that information on most counties and states have a GIS, Graphic Information System. You can go look up what the zoning is, and you can look up where the floodplains are and where the power lines and are, things like that, those kind of construction easements that happen. So I'm going to make some more videos about zoning, and keep coming back to the site because I keep adding. And I want to talk a little bit about, again, the setbacks. Setbacks is a little sub-element of it. For example, if you have a road, they don't want you to build your house like 10 feet from the road. That's a little bit too close, and near road, the snowplows come, and there's other things that happen, and power lines. So there's usually what they call a setback, where if you want to build a home, it's going to have to be like, I've been in one where it's like 35 feet from the road. Okay, well, I personally don't like being 35 feet from a road. I'd rather be like 100 feet from a road, especially if it was a busy one. But if the road is really quiet, then I don't mind being 35 feet from a road. But you don't want to build your garage exactly like 6 inches next to the border of another property. That's a little bit too close. So usually what they'll say for something like a garage is they'll give you like, okay, you got to have like 48 inches or 2 feet inside the boundary of a property. So when you do buy property and invest in property out in the countryside, consider these power line easements also, and some of the other setbacks things that happen. And there's also one more final thing, is the covenants that might be in a deed. For example, there might be an area that has, like, say they built 20 lots long ago, and all these lots it was just one small development, and their code was not really complicated. Like some developments have very complicated codes about what can be built there and how, and even to the kind of mulch you have on your trees. Okay, but in this case, some developments will put some minor things. Like there was one that I literally saw, they didn't want any pigs and chickens because they make noise and smells and so on. So, but they try to keep it minimal without trying to. The more covenant deeds and deed restrictions there are in a piece of property, then it starts to diminish the value of what someone else might want to do with a piece of property. So, another thing quickly about wells, about ponds. I mean, a natural pond is a really great blessing to have on a piece of property, because it supports life. It's a good fire protection to have a pond on your property out in the country. It's also, you can put fish in there and so on. But building a pond is another thing entirely. There are some states and counties where they really want to make sure that what you're doing is not going to flood the town below. If it collapses, building dams, it's all possible, but it involves some paperwork and some permissions and so on to just go build yourself a pond. But I'll keep coming back again to some of these other videos. I don't want to make them too long because it's a little easier to manage if we have shorter segments. So thanks again for listening, and please come back and listen to some others. And feel free to contact me. The email address is on here in the website. I have another website called virginialandowner.com, and you can please like and share. And again, thanks again for listening.